Okay, everybody, I'm here, I'm Steve, and I'm about to share with you what is actually quite a remarkable story about the entire evolution journey of creatine, and it goes back almost 200 years. Just to set some context, if you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're going, and I think this is really important in terms of understanding the evolution of creatine from its discovery right through to where we are today and where creatine potentially could go. There are so many clues in this almost historical story, and I hope that by hearing it and kind of interpreting it in your own ways, you'll maybe have a new way of even thinking about what's possible with creatine and where could creatine go based on where it came from. So this is a pretty standard, simple slide. What is creatine? For anybody that doesn't know, and I'm not assuming that everybody does, so we don't assume anything in life. It's a naturally occurring compound produced in the human body by the kidneys, liver, and pancreas. It's produced through enzyme-driven reactions involving amino acids and stored primarily in the muscles, which accounts for about 95% of that storage, and the brain 5%. And it's stored as phosphocreatine, which is utilizable energy when it goes through the ATP-ADP Krebs cycle. So it plays a pivotal role in energy metabolism and contributes to a broad range of physiological functions. And it's found in the diet in foods like red meat, and fish. However, dietary intake alone isn't sufficient to fully saturate the muscles and brain creatine stores. And this is going to become very important when I speak about people that are on predominantly plant-based diets and vegans. So the discovery of creatine goes back to 1832, which is a long time ago. And a French scientist called Michel-Eugène Chevreul, he isolated creatine from beef tissue, and he named the molecule from the Greek word kreas, which means meat. It's incredible to think that it was even possible to do something like this. If you try and imagine what the lab environment was that they were working in, what tools they had to work with, they had no internet, they had no way of sharing knowledge of co-creating really with anybody. This was the mind of a genius, of which there were many back in the day. It was truly the mind of a genius who, on a hunch, followed that hunch, and it led to what we now know today as creatine monohydrate. It's actually quite remarkable. The story goes to the next level, actually, when a gentleman called Justus von Liebig, who was a German scientist, started building really on Chevreul's 1932 discovery. And in 1847, he confirmed and chemically identified creatine. So in quite a short space of time, there were two quite significant breakthroughs. But Chevreul took it to the next level. He realized and he recognized, and part of this was through a serendipitous moment with an acquaintance whose daughter was very sick. He'd been kind of using a meat extract himself, and it seemed to make him feel better. And he gave this to this young woman, and she recovered very, very quickly. And you'd think, well, that's just some kind of a story, but it wasn't. What he realized is that he was on the edge of being able to extract meat from, he was able to create a meat extraction that contained very, very high levels of creatine monohydrate, or of creatine. And with that knowledge and know-how, he launched the world's first creatine supplement. It was in the form of a paste that was a condiment that people used to add to their soups, and to soups and to dinner and things like that. And this product really took off. It exploded, actually. They built a huge manufacturing facility in Uruguay. They developed a group of technological innovations around meat processing. They developed innovations around entrepreneurial fundraising, organizational innovations, vertical integration, you name it, they did it. They even developed a little blue signature that became the trust mark. And this product exploded globally. They were selling huge amounts of this meat concentrate all over the world. And it eventually led in 1910 to the meat paste or the meat extract pivoting into what we saw when we were growing up with in the kitchen at home, the OXO cube. And it was the same company that eventually developed the OXO cube. And that became, quite a big staple in the kitchen. It didn't contain as much creatine, but it was a very, very convenient way of having a meat extract that you could very easily and conveniently add to soups and puddings. It was given to soldiers during World War I. It was in their kit bags so that they could have a warming drink. It became a very versatile product. And the similarities are actually quite uncanny when you compare where creatine has been for a long time with what we're now seeing, which is the pivot into very convenient products aimed at a much wider consumer group. And I'll get much deeper into that in a few minutes. So from 1911 to 1991, there wasn't the kind of breakthroughs that I've just spoken about and just mentioned. There was a lot of deep work. These were curious and scientists with a lot of ingenuity doing deep work around creatine, around its impact on the muscle, its impact on muscle strength, but they were using quite rudimentary tools. But they were also starting to see that it had other applications, but a lot of the tools that they required to go much deeper didn't exist. The key breakthrough during this time was an entirely new kind of muscle biopsy. And it was that muscle biopsy in the late 80s and early 90s that led to what was arguably the single biggest creatine breakthrough. And that was with this research paper that was written by Dr. Roger Harris, Professor Eric Hultman, and Professor Karin Zonderland, who did most of their research at the Karolinska Institute up in Sweden, very close to it was in Stockholm. And this seminal paper, the breakthrough paper, it demonstrated actually categorically that giving an athlete or a person creatine around about 5 grams per day would lead to a 1 to 3% performance improvement in explosive sprint and power sports. And at this moment in time in 92, I was the founder of a sport nutrition brand out of the UK. And I received a telephone call on the 3rd of March from Roger Harris. And he got our contact details because we were already providing product and know-how to the British Olympic team, preparing for the Barcelona games in 92. And there was no internet, so I didn't really know who Roger was. I knew who Eric Hultman was because he'd done some carbohydrate research, but when Roger called me, I didn't know who he was. And he asked to meet with me 5 days later on the 8th of March. And I went to that meeting, not really knowing what to expect. And the meeting took place in the north of England. It was at a country hotel, and it was a life-changing moment, I think, for the three of us that were in the room, including Eric. They handed me a 1 kilo bag of creatine monohydrate, the kilo, and they gave me a printed version of the yet-to-be-published research paper. And armed with that, they gave me a challenge. Can you get this product into the hands of some of the athletes who will be competing in Barcelona? If you do, there's a real probability that they'll win gold medals. And they literally gave me that challenge. And that is how my journey with creatine began. 47 days later, 7 days later, we had this. I was very lucky to live very close to a small pharmaceutical company. And the very first product, the very first modern day creatine product that was ever developed was an effervescing tablet. You dropped it in water, it dissolved, and you drank it. And that lucky break with the pharmaceutical company gave us everything we needed to be able to go with the paperwork to the British Olympic Association, the Sports Council. With the support of Eric and Roger, we were able to convince them and give them the confidence to allow the Olympic athletes to start to work with creatine. It was confirmed that it wasn't anabolic. They wouldn't be compromising any doping tests. It was found in food. And it literally began as simple as that. The effort that went into getting us to this place and bringing us all the way to the games in Barcelona, it was 7 days a week, not really sleeping. It was just focused on what the mission was all about. But what was happening in Barcelona is that a huge story was brewing that we didn't know about. And we received a telephone call on the 26th, 27th of July from an investigative journalist. He'd got wind that the athletes from the British team had something, and he gave us a choice. I'm either going to break this as a doping story, or I need to know what's really going on. So Roger Eric did all the real heavy lifting, gave him everything he needed for the story. We had the documentation from the British Olympic Association and the Sports Council, and he wrote a story which changed the face of modern day supplementation. From this moment on, we won gold medals, a total of 5, but these were the 2 big athletes that got all the publicity, Linford Christie and the amazing Sally Gunnell. The story went full viral, pre-internet, pre-social media, pre-influencers. For Roger and myself, it was like hanging onto the wing of a jet for about 2 years. It was non-stop. It was amazing. It led to moments that I could have never imagined a matter of months earlier. In '93, we filed a very important creatine patent. And in that patent, we referenced mood disorders, dementia, chronic fatigue syndrome, anxiety disorders, brain-related disorders. And, you know, a lot of you may be asking yourselves, how did you know about this? And we're only just now starting to realize the huge implications of bringing creatine into that world alone. It's a long story, but there's a massive story behind what happened from this patent being filed to now. The other huge breakthrough, and it's really important that Anthony and Ed are part of this story, was in the USA. Anthony Almada, a very, very, very smart biochemist, and his businessman partner, Ed Bird, they obviously read about the creatine in the media, and they also started to, they founded EAS, they were looking for a direction, and they had a vision for commercializing creatine in the USA that took creatine to a completely different level. They had a connection with a man called Bill Phillips. He had a huge muscle media empire and a magazine called Muscle Media 2000. And that magazine took creatine into the lives of hundreds of thousands of people in the USA. By the time of the Olympic Games in '96 in Atlanta, around about 80% of all athletes competing across all sports were on some kind of a creatine regime. So in 4 years, it went from being non-existent to being a staple in hardcore sport, high performance sport, gyms, bodybuilding. In that space, it really established itself extremely quickly. Dave Slagle, who's one of the hosts of this webinar tonight or today, he was one of the very first people in the world to start taking it as what you would call a consumer. He began in April 1993, which was literally a few weeks after Anthony and Ed launched Phosphagen in the American market. Creatine approvals were given during this period. USDA approved it in 2020. EFSA, the European Food Safety, gave approvals in 2011 and 2016. But it still looked like this. Even as recent as 2021, it was still powder, and predominantly in this world of quite hardcore, but it was a big market. It was a growing market, but it was people that felt they needed to get muscle gain from it. They needed to get gains in being able to push harder, more reps, recover faster. The transition to the mainstream, people like our parents and our neighbors, hadn't happened as recently as 2021, and it's unbelievable to imagine now what has happened in the last 4 years. It's truly astonishing. So really, there's been a realization, and this is the now. So here we are. We have vast amounts of substantiated science. Some of it is evidence that is proving that across a number of new benefits, new research, new benefits, there are applications for entirely new audiences. We start thinking about women's health. We start thinking about aging population, health span, longevity. We start thinking about brain health. We start realizing that the benefit for vegans alone can be transformative. And it's metabolic health, cognitive support, enhanced mitochondrial function, cellular energy, the possibilities in terms of GLP-1 and this new way of losing weight, which is going to have a huge impact on the mass population, and providing muscle support to help offset atrophy as people lose weight and lose muscle. These are huge new benefit opportunity areas. The next creatine consumers are really cross-generational. It's really looking at this through a start early lens. It's about ageless vitality. The older you get and as you age, your need for creatine improves significantly because your body's capability to produce creatine starts to diminish. So you need to be, supplementing your diet with creatine from either from food, which you don't get that much. Primarily, it's coming from powder and new delivery systems. This is really exciting. The new big growth driver of creatine are women. The women have really started to understand the implications for what it means to them. The women's health implications, and within women's health, what's possible is answering so many questions and needs that women have, from fertility to during pregnancy to childbirth to menopause to bone health. It's a very, very long list. And even if this was the only breakthrough area, if this was the breakthrough area, it's transformational for human health. It's transformational for creatine. The power's really shifting, and what has happened is that influencers and some of the really huge big influencers that have got huge reach have started to talk about creatine, bring guests onto their shows that talk about creatine. You've got some of the top leading scientists now talking on social media about creatine. You've got other influencers that are talking about creatine. And what we've seen is a shift in where people are getting their knowledge about creatine from. This is very, very important. The popularity as a result of this has increased significantly. If you look at, we did a little, we just went into altmetric and just played around with the dashboard. And you see this quite flat curve until 2015, 2020, it starts to pick up. If we did this on a true year-by-year basis, the way that curve has gone from the beginning of 2014 to 2024 to almost the end of 25 is truly astonishing. It's close to vertical. The interest, the appetite for more knowledge about creatine, the search inquiries are just, it's absolutely staggering. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of % increase in just the population's interest in wanting to know about creatine. But it begs the question, how much of this is actually signal, but how much of it is noise? We've already had the first moment where the banana skin caused creatine to experience what is known as Gummygate. It led to a lot of negative press, a lot of controversy about gummies. What's in gummies? Is there anything in gummies? Are gummies the right thing to be taking? And at the end of the day, everything that creates a stronger product and better knowledge is good. And it's been quite interesting actually to see what has happened. Gummygate has pretty much had no negative impact on consumer confidence in gummies. We're still seeing gummies as the preferred, fastest growing dosage form for consumers. I haven't got the numbers from Spins for the end of 25, but at the end of 24, it was showing 360% year-on-year growth. There's no reason to think that that's slowing down anytime soon. And the Vitamin Shops 2025 trend report, which came out recently, is showing a 1,300% year-on-year for gummies search over 2024. So Gummygate hasn't had any real negative impact on gummies in the eyes of the consumer. What it has done, it's forced manufacturers and the companies that are developing the technology that makes creatine stable in a gummy up their game. They're having to go the extra mile and much more to reassure consumers. And it's also made it much easier to identify the bad actors that are selling snake oil. And there are many of them in the world of supplements. Taste and convenience is what is really bringing creatine now into this new world. We've got a better understanding as we approach the end of the year what creatine in ready to consume could conceivably look like. From energy bars to gummies to coffee in capsules, effervescing tablets, shots, creatine in little pots of pudding or yogurt, creatine in cereal, creatine in protein beverages, powder in stick packs, which are super on trend at the moment, creatine that you can chew, creatine in beverages, even though we're still in need of a truly liquid stable creatine technology. And in Brazil, we've even found a creatine gel. So there's lots of little companies that are trying to find out what's possible. What's the next thing that's going to follow gummies as the next big breakout? Nobody knows right now. It's just a matter of entrepreneurs trying new things, experimenting, using their ingenuity, and just seeing what the next one is that consumers or people that want to start taking creatine in new ways decide to go with. It's a very exciting time. We've got new growing claims coming out. We've got formats that are leading this growth. We've got research in performance on the decline, but research around health and clinical, cognition and neurological issues, and clinical applications growing massively. So we're seeing a wind of change now really driving creatine and almost pulling creatine into this new world, which is going to open up creatine to probably hundreds of millions of people that have yet to try it, but really need to be trying it and using it. Creatine powder still dominates. It's super versatile. You can add it to anything: soups, puddings, salad dressing, smoothies, you name it. You can add powder to pretty much anything. Coffee, tea. I even know people that add it to, half a glass of beer, and they mix it in and they drink their beer with creatine in it. I know it sounds a little crazy, but people find what works for them, and that's their thing. And interestingly, when you think about innovation, it's very easy to think you've got to push the innovation envelope out. You've got to go far out into areas that are, totally brand new. And sometimes that's not the way to bring people along with you. And sometimes just a little small 20% innovation can be all it needs to transform a product or the product or brand advantage that you're looking for. Most of those products that I've just shown you a couple of slides ago, they're very simple ideas. They're existing products that are infused with creatine and are great ways of testing out what works, what doesn't work, when you've got a finished product that you can actually get into the hands of people. So now we come to creatinification, and this is where things get really quite interesting, because it also is really looking at future facing, future casting. Where could this go? What is possible? I think this is really the defining decade. And by that, are we in a hype cycle? Could this all fizzle out? I truly believe that this time it won't. I believe this with all my heart. We've truly crossed the threshold this time into creatine being cared for by scientists that are doing the great work. There are companies that are in this for the long play. I'm talking decades of long play. There are people building brands that are in it for the long play. When you work with people like that, you're playing by a different playbook. You're working to a different set of rules. And it's a great place to be if you're you're an innovator, you're a human biologist, you're a chemist, you're somebody that's interested in this area, because creatine is on a multi-decade journey as we start to realize truly what's possible. It's already moved beyond sport. We're now in kind of the place that I call active, and it's on this wonderful journey into the mainstream. So we call this the era of agelessness and fearlessness. And it's really the erosion of traditional life stages. It's reaching your 50s and 60s and 70s, having the heart that you had when you were younger, but also feeling that vitality that gives you that ability to still do things as you age that you love to do. You can still hike, you can still play tennis, you can do fun things with your grandkids. And I think people that grew up in the 60s and 70s, I'm one of them, we have a different perception of what aging means to us in 2025. It's very different to our parents and grandparents. We grew up with pop culture. We were there the day that Red Bull entered the market, which was nearly 40 years ago. We've lived through the world pre-internet. We've experienced the internet and the digital revolution unfolding. We don't want to get old. We are, but we want to remain young in our hearts and continue to contribute meaningfully to our communities, our families, and society. It's an amazing place to be. And I can vouch for many people that are like me. We're in our 60s and 70s. It's an amazing place to be, with the science and the new research that's pointing us in all sorts of remarkable directions, not just with creatine. So it's about closing the health span gap for millions and millions of people. It's life-changing. It's human health changing. It's going to change the way that populations imagine what's possible, whether it's prevention, whether it's helping people get better after they start recovering, or they're recovering from an illness. We're truly crossing the chasm now. We're kind of in this 2025, 2028 space. The dates really for 2029 onwards could be compressed significantly. I'm just kind of imagining that it's probably going to take to 2029, but it may not. We're moving very, very fast at the moment, and that trajectory is only going to get faster. Creatine is still relatively small when you compare it to protein supplementation, which in 2024, protein supplementation, the market was $26.2 billion. Creatine globally in 2024 was only 1.1 billion, which is still quite big, but it's relatively small. We believe creatine is the next big thing to go on the journey that protein has been on now for a few years and is now fully on, which is the proteinification of everything. When you look at 2030, potentially 4.3 billion is what's being projected. That is only for powders and gummies. It does not include breakthroughs in liquid stable creatine. It does not include breakthroughs in new technologies. And there's no reason why we cannot start thinking like we do in technology. What are the 10x multipliers? How do we 10x the market? And it's not about 10xing it because there's money to be made, which is important for companies that are in this space. It's how do we reach more people? How can we truly take creatine from the 32 to 35 million people that are using it on a daily basis today to 320 million people? How do we get it to 1 billion people in the next decade? because then we're having profound impacts on human health. It's the compression in terms of how we can do this is going to come from a combination of emotional intelligence, human imagination, and the realization that AI is going to be this incredible augmentation tool that enables us to turn the emotional intelligence and the human imagination that we have into vision that becomes reality much faster than we've ever seen it happen in the past. It's going to compress research at warp speed. We're going to get papers coming out much faster, clinical studies taking place much faster, human clinical trials taking place much faster. This is going to just speed up the possibilities with creatine. And you start to realize that 10x multipliers in this space can be very, very real. This is not me just pontificating and blue sky thinking. To do this, it's going to require a shift in mindset from some of the best people, best researchers, best Imagineers, best innovators in the world, from both within the food industry and from outside the food industry. And when we bring these people together, we make magic happen, and we only speed up the ambition that we have to bring creatine to more people. So what could this mean for creatine? So this is just one thesis. This is just one thing that it could mean. Does it mean that creatine could be part of our fortification future? Which is quite interesting to think about. If we think about fortification today, iron, folic acid, vitamin D, vitamin A, iodine. Why? They're deficiency driven. They're relatively cheap. They're ultra stable. They're easily mass distributed, and their impact is clinically undeniable. Creatine ticks all of those Y boxes. Fortification future, sarcopenia, falls and fractures, frailty, cognitive decline, post-hospitalization muscle wasting, metabolic inflexibility. Could creatine end up becoming commoditized? New delivery formats, bioavailability is going to rule for sure. Liquid finally becomes the norm. So we have forms of creatine that you can drink that are super convenient. Do we start thinking of creatine as critical infrastructure, not just an ingredient? And by infrastructure, it's looking at it through a full holistic 360 lens. All of the use cases, what is possible across the entire spectrum of aging and life. It's absolutely amazing that today across the globe, we're actually connected through the internet, and we can, make all of this happen so much faster. So creatinification is happening. Beverages will come on stream in the next 12 to 24 months. We're starting to see explorations into baked goods, confectionery. It's not inconceivable that we could have pasta, creatification of pasta, popcorn, ice cream, tea, instant coffee. I'm not here to play the role of the food police and start to talk about what is right for people to eat, what is ultra-processed food. My story isn't about that. My story is about how do we bring creatine to the mass population in forms that are super convenient and taste great. When we look at fortification, it actually starts to look crazy. Could we fortify rice? Could we fortify dairy? Could we fortify flour? Could we fortify salt? What if creatine was in water? You're starting to look at technologies that exist but have never been applied to solving this problem for creatine. When you think about it through the fortification lens, we could touch 2 billion people. 2 billion people globally. From where we are today, let's say best case scenario, 40 million people. We could touch 2 billion people with creatine and all the health benefits. Unbelievable. I want to be part of this so much. I'm throwing in a provocation. If you've never seen the monologue on the fall of the House of Usher, please watch it. It's quite important in the context of two kind of a fork in the road in terms of where creatine could go. I'm not here to say which is the right road, which is the wrong road. There's just the two roads that it could go down. It's probably going to go down both of them. Watch The Fall of the House of Usher, Lemons, just Google it, YouTube it, and watch it. It sounds totally crazy what the guy on the right's talking about, but it's not. I know of a number of groups that are imagining a future in longevity that looks like that model. Which playbook wins? I don't know. I don't think any of us do. But I will tell you which playbook I do want to win. But before I do that, for anybody that's watching this, that is working with creatine today, that is selling creatine, that is manufacturing creatine, all you have to do is focus on what matters. And you decide and determine what it is that what matters to you. Nobody else. You determine what matters. Our mission at Jenerise is incredibly simple. We want to initially increase global creatine adoption tenfold. It's not Jenerise is going to do that. It's going to be in the ecosystem, working to be something that helps catalyze that transformation from where it is to where it can be within the next 5 years. It comes with huge challenges that go right back to the beginning of the supply chain. It is hugely complex, and it's a huge once-in-a-lifetime challenge that the team that we're assembling at Jenerise are stepping into. We are fully game on for this. The great Dr. Harris, who was the first mentor in my life, and he sadly passed away last November. I was on a car journey with him. I spent a lot of time with Roger in the first 18 months that we got to know each other. And I vividly remember being in the car. Roger was the most eloquently speaking person you could ever imagine. An amazing human, could speak about everything and anything. His interests were so broad and wide. I wish he'd have given a TED talk like Sir Ken Robinson. He would have given a Ken Robinson-like TED talk. I so wish that he'd have done that. He mentioned to me, and he said to me, and I remember him saying this, one day, Steve, everybody will take creatine. He knew what was possible in 1992. I have made a commitment to the creatine community, the scientists, the people named on this slide, that is what brought me back, and that is what Jenerise is here to do. Nothing else. One day, everyone will take creatine. Thank you so much for listening to me. I know I get very passionate. It's a great honor and it's a great privilege to be able to share this with you. Thank you so much.